I'm at the Ohio Supercomputer Center. I've been here for a really long time. I don't remember exactly how long. I was briefly at the University of Tennessee for a while, for about 7 years, but I've been doing HPC for a long time, and I'm happy to get involved in this group.
Great. Alan, anything you want to throw out?
Yes, I just want to thank you and everyone from CARC for giving me the opportunity to help you guys out. I'm a little busy right now, so I need to kind of step back, but I will be on the calls, and I really like the direction of where all the CARC-facing groups are going. So I'll still be a participant here, and wish you guys all well here. Thanks a lot.
We appreciate everything you've done for us. So we'll kind of continue this transition kind of between here and probably the January meeting, which then kind of brings up the next point that starting January, we'll kind of go back to the normal third Thursday of the month schedule, which would put us back on like January 17th will be the next call. So the last bits that I'm going to throw out is I'd like to kind of make a little active seek for volunteers. We have some requested interest in various things to do with clouds. We've had requests for interest in HIPAA in the cloud or multiple hybrid cloud management monitoring. So if anybody would like to help volunteer, cover a part or portions of those topics, some of this interest can be between multiple tracks, not just systems facing, but between some of the other facings. Please go ahead and reach back to Alan, Troy, or myself. Feel free to add your name to the document as well down at the bottom. We'd love to get some help with some of these other topics as we look forward. So with all of that said, we have Wendy from Cornell, Wendy Kozlowski, and she is going to cover our topic for us today. I'll let her kind of give a little introduction to that, as well as kind of indicate how she'd like us to participate with her. My only request for the rest of us is keep yourself muted unless you're asking a question, but also feel free to go ahead and ask the question in the chat channel. Alan, Troy, and I will try to keep an eye on that to make sure Wendy's aware of those questions so that we can get them answered. And we'll turn the time over to Wendy and go from there.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate your invitation to speak to your group. I'm going to turn the video off now. I had a few times where you guys dropped out on the audio and during your introduction too, so I'm going to open my bandwidth up a little bit here and stop my video. And so I was invited to speak to you all today about the interactive data storage finder tool that we set up here at the at Cornell in late 2017. This, I will say also upfront that I am, while my background is in oceanography, I am now a librarian. I do not have a strong technical background, so I'm happy to, for any questions that I'm unable to answer, to take some notes and find out someone here at the university that could get those answers for you. So my perspective is really coming from why we built the tool, how we built the tool, and how we maintain it. So the backstory, we see this often with our researchers. My job, I should give you a little insight into what I do. So my role is as a coordinator of a group that we have here on campus called the Research Data Management Service Group. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's a great organization that brings in experts from not just the library, but all over campus. So our central IT unit, our high performance computing center, our Institute for Social and Economic Research, our Biotechnology Resource Center, a bunch of different places on campus that all have different areas of expertise related to research data and research data management. And one of the things this group serves as is kind of a gathering place for all the information of what we are hearing on campus that people need. And this description that I have on the screen now is really one of them. We hear a lot of people saying, I have got a lot of data. but I don't know where I should put it. And when we get people coming to us with that question, there's no, of course, as you know, one answer to it. It really is an it depends situation. But we're also really finding that just as often, well, it's hard to know whether it's just as often or not, but very often we're not getting asked and people are really trying to dig around themselves and find their own solutions. So in the course of kind of conversations with all these different units on campus that are helping support and provide different storage options, we really heard that this was happening pretty often. So where we were at when we started really seeing a lot of people ask about storage is this kind of place where I think many of our universities have is a really flat kind of list of services, saying you go to a web page and you say, if I go to this one provider, here is what is available to me. On the screen right now, for those of you who are on the Zoom, it's really kind of a flat list. You can say, all right, I want to go learn more about Crash Plan, and I expand it and I can get a little bit of information from this particular website on it. And even this group that I am a coordinator of, the way we were presenting our information at the time was a list, a little bit more information. We gathered resources from lots of different places on campus, so at least they had to go to one website. You can only maintain so much, right? These things are hard to keep up to date and representative of what's really available. So this was a first stab at it, pulling together all the different storage things that you could get at possibilities that were available to you at Cornell, and pulling it into one place so you can see the BRC offers a few things. Central IT offers a few things. Sizer offered a few different options. The other problem that people were running into is that it was really hard to get consistent information. So not only did you have to know which website to go to get information, it was really, really hard to compare services side by side because we're a fairly big university. We don't necessarily, the service providers don't necessarily talk to each other about what it is that they convey on their websites. And so for one place, it might be really easy to go to and say, here is the systems that it can run on and the limitations that it has, the strengths that it has. But a different site that offers a different service may not offer or talk about those same details or present the same level of information. Generally, people were looking for what the service provides, how they go about getting it, and really people want to know the bottom line is how much does it cost. So multiple clicks through some of these websites to get that information was often a challenge. So again, as I said, we were hearing lots of people trying to figure out how to get data storage options. This was a spreadsheet that came to our attention that one of the groups on campus had built, one of the local IT groups had built to support the faculty in their particular college. And so they had put together essentially what they were finding was important to their researchers for making decisions. So you can see a number of services listed across the top: cost, transfer rate, access, security, and other information. And this was a spreadsheet they were handing out to faculty members when they inquired about learning more about what their storage options. So often for new faculty or new projects that would have different requirements for data storage. So once we realized this was kind of a universal problem, we of course first did an environmental scan and found out to at least a little bit of comfort that Cornell was not alone in how we were doing it. And I do not mean to give anybody else a hard time, but this is how some of the other institutions at that time were doing things. So again, this is, if you're looking at the screen, it shows a summary chart that was on the UC Berkeley site. Stanford was doing something pretty similar. It looks a lot like that spreadsheet that was on the slide before, right? Where you go through and you try to get side-by-side information on these different services. So we dug a little bit further, and a lot closer to home, our own Weill Cornell group was using their actual service support tool, ServiceNow. You're probably all familiar with it, to pull together all the different storage options that people at Weill were able to draw on. So we thought this was a really neat way to go about it. It was interactive. You can see a series of questions along the left-hand side about classification, quantity, resiliency, performance, sharing, and method of access. And then as you click different options on those, the right-hand side shows little cards of their services, and those come and go as they want. So we decided this was really what we were after. We want something so that for people who don't get a hold of anyone asking for a consultation to learn more details about things, they can really kind of have this self-help service to pick out the important features for determining what's going to work for them and what isn't. However, this, as I said, was tied into actually ServiceNow and was built in that platform. And that was a possibility for Weill Cornell because all the data storage options at Weill are offered through central IT. And that's not how it is up here on the Ithaca campus. Like I said, they're offered through lots of different entities. An organizational group, so they don't all use the same. Of course, we don't all use the same ticketing system to manage our stuff. So we had to come up with another solution. So we had to have it be independent of our management system. At the time, we knew that we had about 20 different storage solutions that we'd be looking to describe. And we didn't yet know who was going to develop it, support it, maintain it, and how we were going to pay for it. So in order to start thinking about this, I just went through, and probably a bunch of you are going to wince if you can see this screen. This is just a dummy that I mocked up using Excel. And I put all the data that I had about all these service providers into a big spreadsheet and built a pivot table on it, and essentially did exactly the same thing that Weill Cornell did with that ServiceNow tool, and said, okay, if these are the questions that we're asking, this is a filtering. So I'm like, well, this isn't going to be all that hard to take out of the system itself. At least we can do it. I kind of presented this as a proof of concept that we ought to be able to then just serve this up somehow on the website. And you're probably all laughing at me now. So it's not as simple as I thought it was going to be, of course. So this just shows for you, those of you, again, looking at the screen, you can select using the pivot tables, different options, the same way you could on the Weill Cornell page. And I just realized that you had asked me to talk about how we wanted to interact on this, because there were 44 of you when I started talking. I don't know how many there are on now. Perhaps it makes sense to just wait till I'm done, and then we can all ask questions, and I would love to have a conversation about your thoughts and improvements and things like that on it at the end. So that can either go through chat or we can open up the mics at the end. So I, with the RDMSG, then took the idea up through our administrative chain, and we were able to get kind of campus-wide support to make this happen. So Central IT footed the bill for development, and the Office of Research provided their support as well, as far as just making sure that we would have participation by all the different units on campus to fill the needed tables to get the thing to happen. Obviously, I wasn't going to be able to get it on a website, so we did a series of open bids for the actual development of it, and the ranges came in between $7,000 and $23,000 for those bids. We settled somewhere in the middle of that with the Cornell Custom Development Group website group here at Cornell. And they built it on Drupal 8. We're currently running it on Drupal 8.7.1. And that happened early in 2017. And even though it was going to contain information from lots of different units on campus, the Research Data Management Service Group, that group that I coordinate, was assigned as the project lead on it. So we were given the responsibility of collecting the information and making sure that it stays up to date once the tool was live. The other criterion we were given from Central IT was that it needed to be built in a way that it could be repurposed, both on campus itself. So if other units, so if IT says they wanted to build a tool that was able to interact and help people compare what different website options there are for faculty to put websites up, they could do it like that. So it had to be built in a way that was customizable. And that was really important to us as RDMSG, because we also needed to be able to, once it was built, we needed to be able to make edits ourselves. We didn't want to have to go back to the development team in order to do basic updates and maintenance on it. The other thing that was really important to me from the library perspective was that we built it with user functionality in mind. And so we were very involved with usability testing. We did 3 rounds of it, both with a group of consultants, so those experts that I talked about that are already involved with the RDMSG helped with some of it. We went out and recruited faculty members, staff members, and administrators. We started our first round of testing with just kind of the wireframe stuff that, if you're looking at the screen, is up there now. So not even any kind of functionality, but seeing if people liked that idea of being able to use facets to filter down on the one side. And did the cards make sense? Did the kind of information that we were conveying at the highest level and the functionality, did it make sense there? So we looked at the overall methodology of how we were going to present the information, the behavior of the tool itself. A lot of time was spent sweating the wording and how we were going to convey the tremendous amount of information that people actually do want to know about each of these tools. And then if you're familiar with the tool, at the very bottom, there is a comparison grid, and that what information was put in there and how that was conveyed was also tested pretty extensively. So we did over 2 months of testing between August and October of 2017. And that was really, really useful and critical to getting the tool to the point where it is now. So if you haven't been there, the URL for the tool is at finder.research.cornell.edu /storage. And this is what the top page was looked at like. So even though this site is, you'll notice the URL is different than the main Research Data Management Service Group, because the library hosts our main site. This tool is hosted on Pantheon because they built it on Drupal 8, and at the time the library was still on Drupal 7. So there's a little bit of logistics that we had to work out there. And the facets, this is obviously reorganized. I'm not doing, although I suppose I could do just a live demo real quick, but the facets that we ended up settling on to start people out with what they wanted to choose was about starting with this idea of the sensitivity or classification of the data itself. If you are on the live site, you can click on that gray circle with the eye around it, and you get information by what we actually mean. This single question took a tremendous amount of time to settle on the wording and make sure people understood what we meant by which category of classified data they have. It really uncovered the fact that at the time we were not using very consistent language across the institution about how we described our data classification. The second issue was really kind of around this idea of how much backing up do we need? And we realized, again, vocabulary was really, really different. The humanists think of things very differently than the computer scientists. So putting more words in there, it was better, like finding something that each person could relate to. So this question addressed the issue of as backups as well as replication, and we hoped that this idea of durability versus availability would be able to be conveyed in this question. They really, are they serving data out and they want to have zero downtime, or do they just want to make sure that they have a disaster recovery copy? Size, of course, becomes an issue. The 1 terabyte question, or the breaking point of 1 terabyte on here, was a little bit random, especially given that so many tools have different limitations. The 1 terabyte was put in there because that seemed reasonable as far as where functionality falls apart in some of these tools, as well as the number of files itself. So kind of what kind of, are you really looking for a file management system or not? Whether or not they're going to need to have access on remote devices, or are they going to be always sitting at their desktop? And then kind of this idea of who can have access to the storage area, and we base that on our single sign-on needs. So whether or not they have what we call a net ID here at Cornell, or a wild net ID, or if they have to share it with people outside of the community. So there's an example of what the detail you get when you put on the I or help tag. And, you know, again, these little tiny things, we probably changed that little icon for how you get more information 3 or 4 times before we settled on the gray I with the circle around it. So back to the main site. So those questions are along the left-hand side. When you select things, the cards on the right-hand side of the screen drop in and out as appropriate for the answers that they select. And then once you selected which ones you're interested, you can put check marks on the ones that specific ones that you want to learn more about, or you can use the button at the top that says select all, and it takes you to a comparison page where we tried to gather the same kind of information about whatever tool it was that they wanted to look at. There's more than what's showing on the screen. So if you're looking at the live site, scroll down, you can see a lot of other things. Of course, cost was a really big thing. Again, I mentioned this before, trying to find a way that balanced precision and our ability to actually maintain this information, and the challenges that are imposed in how hard it is to price out some of these things. That it depends answer comes up very often. So we ended up putting them in buckets, essentially. So the single dollar sign logo is you know, less than $500 per terabyte per year. We have a bin for the free ones, and then a double dollar sign and a triple dollar sign. So up to 1,000 terabytes a year and over 1,000 terabytes a year. Those are the cost limits that we put on it. So there's some capacity, there's access. Based on the usability testing, we added a field on here for ease of use. So kind of technical difficulty. So again, the differences in needs from the people that are really looking for high performance solutions versus those that are perhaps an incoming student and they have no idea what they need, or a brand new faculty member in a field that doesn't really need the kind of high-end computing demands that some others might need. Oh, there's the second page. So what kind of data are allowed? Some of those same questions, durability, availability, and then of course contact information at the bottom. So this really is supposed to be kind of a concierge place where everything comes together. It's not meant to provide the nitty-gritty of those details, and that's where they go down to the contact information to get that. So of course then we also wanted to have the option. So the RDMSG does offer consultations on all the storage options that are provided. And again, I can say that the RDMSG provides, but really what we do is put the right people in contact with one another. So if people were using the storage finder and actually wanted to get more information, we wanted to make that as easy as possible for them. So we added this little tool at the bottom where they could email their results, the selections that they chose and the resulting storage options that would work for them, and the opportunity to send an email and ask for more help. And that takes them to, or then there's this option to have provide us feedback on the tool itself. So hoping that we'd be able to continually make improvements on it. That just takes people to a Qualtrics survey. We have had very, very few people interact with us this way, but there was no way of knowing that. We do know that we set up analytics on the site. So we started with just Matamo, and we also have Google Analytics running on it. And in the 2 years that, or almost 2 years now that it's been live, we've had about just over 4,000 unique visitors on the site itself. And we do know that a number of other institutions have contacted us along the way to build it. So the code is available. There's a link to it on GitHub in the bottom of our website. We know that Colgate and UCSD and the University of Minnesota have stood up their own instances of this. So perhaps our own users aren't letting us know that they are liking it using our feedback tool, but it seems to be something that resonates with the community as far as a good way to convey this information, especially when it's coming from lots of different units. Really what we learned, we couldn't please everybody. So we tried to take everybody's feedback as much as we could in building the tool, but ultimately we just had to make some decisions, some calls on wording and what was going to be included and not included. A lot of people wanted more, the visual people wanted a lot more on the side of images and logos and things like that, but you really can't convey as much information as you need with that. So you have to include, you can't get away with a lot of letters on a screen. And it took us a lot longer to build than we expect, but hopefully if anyone is interested in this kind of thing, you can skip over that whole usability. Well, you may still need to do some usability testing as far as vocabulary that you put on your own instance. But it did take us a bit longer to learn. I do think that we ended up with a place that people can go to get a side-by-side comparison in a single location. They don't have to know where to go on campus to find specific tools, so they don't have to know that anybody in particular exists. They can come to this page and find out all the options. We were able to build it in a way that the RDMSG staff can do basic maintenance on it. So I reach out to all the service providers regularly to make sure to ask them to review the information that is on the site and provide me with any new services or things that have closed down or any changes that have happened. And we are able to make those edits by ourselves. And like I said, it has definitely been repurposed specifically around data storage at other institutions, but we are currently have on deck, even here at Cornell, we're working on developing hopefully in the next year, we'll see, as these things often fall off schedule, using the same kind of interactive tool with the facets to help people find other data services, things like where they can share their research data, how to find the appropriate licenses to place on it and things like that. So I see there are 24 comments and I have been ignoring them. So I'll open the chat and open it up to questions or comments that you have.
So we've also been combining a lot of the questions into the document. So we can kind of work off of either one.
Right.
I think the first one somebody already indicated was answered, and that was about your pivot table mockup. Would you be willing to share? Somebody noted it was available on GitHub. Is that correct?
The tool itself, the code for the tool itself is on GitHub. Were you interested in my Excel spreadsheet?
Yeah, let's see. Anel had just said that she loved the idea about the pivot table approach for the mockup and was curious if that level would be willing to be shared.
Sure, I'd be happy to. It's clunky, it's Excel, but it was enough to say, hey, the principles behind what you have to do to get this kind of thing doesn't have to be all that hard, as long as you have your data set up properly. Now, by building it in Drupal, we didn't have to, the data, the underlying data is much more easily maintained. I did, when I was gathering in information, I kind of left out, I guess, the part about gathering all the stuff that it took to fill this in was also a huge process. So, like I said, there were 22 different storage services at the time. I think we have 23 or 24 on there now. And just touching base, of those, there were probably 15 different service owners that I was in touch with and tried to get information on all of those. So I did share, I put together the kind of questions that I needed them to answer in a spreadsheet that I shared with each of those, and then pulled them together into kind of a master list that I then populated Drupal with.
Wendy?
I'm scrolling down now in the Google Doc to look.
Wendy, how often do you contact those service providers and update the sheet?
So I agreed that I would reach out to them annually. People have been surprisingly good at keeping in touch with me about it. So I had a number of back and forths with all of the service owners at the time. Many of them I went to and introduced myself to in person. So, I know them now And I feel like that's really helped that relationship in their, I mean, as long as they remember, people are really comfortable saying, hey, Wendy, we just go update this. I'm not asking anyone to do the updating themselves. I think that also probably helps. I'll do that for them as long as they share that information. So we get updates more often than that, but I reach out annually. I see there's a question in there about why Drupal. And that was the platform. So when I said we sent out those bids, and we had the developers in the library submit a bid. We had the custom development group with our university central IT submit a bid, and we had one completely outside private developer submit a bid. And we did not say what platform we wanted it built on, only that those requirements of the fact that I, with limited technical skills, had to be able to, I shouldn't say more limited than a developer, technical skills, had to be able to make basic edits on it. It had to have a look and feel that was similar to our main site, which was on Drupal. And that is on Drupal just because that was what the library was working on at the time. Now, of course, we've shifted most of the library websites off of Drupal and onto WordPress. So that's just kind of where the institution was at the time when we were developing this, was in 17. And the third factor was that they could choose what they wanted as long as it met those two requirements. So I think the private developer was not going to develop on Drupal and somehow have it interact, but it ended up being easier. So it was a little, like I said, it was a little odd in that the tool is built on Drupal 8 and the rest of our website was still on 7, but hosting on Pantheon has worked out great. And again, that is only because there's a university policy here at Cornell to move as much as we can to those cloud-based servers. We've had very minimal downtime. We end up having maintenance updates about every 6 weeks or so. I get a ping from the custom developers to say, hey, go to the test site and just see if everything is working before we push out these updates. And we've had no issues or problems. So the maintenance of it, as far as the actual technical side of it, has been fairly minimal. The development group put into their budget about 15 hours a year for maintenance just on this site.
So there are a few of the questions that kind of relate together, kind of how do you measure success?
You even warned me that one was coming. How do we measure success? So I guess there's two, in my mind, this is a very personal perspective. I think perhaps if you talk to Dave Lifgad, our CIO, and maybe he has a slightly different answer, but from my perspective here in the Research Data Management Service Group is twofold. One is that I know that people at our institution are using it. We have other administrative offices that have put links to it on their websites. Traffic is being directed to this, not just from the Research Data Management Service Group, but from all different places on campus. So people see it as a valuable resource and people are definitely using it. Like I said, I don't have a whole lot to compare it to. When I see over 4,000 hits or 4,000 site visits in 2 years, I feel like at least people are curious about it, whether or not, some of those are probably curious about the functionality from other institutions, and some of them are our researchers themselves. But the fact that other institutions have stood up a similar tool is also saying that to some point we seem to be filling a need, that we're realizing that to get the information people want, we can have help desks that are open for hours, but a lot of people just want to be able to serve themselves. And I think that this tool we hope is doing it. Perhaps we didn't set any goals as far as what we measure to be success. I would say the other thing that I consider to be a success as far as meeting some of the goals about maintenance is that it hasn't been onerous to keep up. Like I said, I think that because people are seeing value in the information being in one spot, the service providers are willing to have those dialogues with us to keep it up to date. There's a question there about how long did it take to develop. So once we finished, so the 3 rounds of usability testing that we did on it, like I said, started really, really simple with the wireframe, so just concept. So after those 2 rounds of user testing, or after the first 2 rounds, the final round of user testing was really down to the nitty gritty, where we had the site functional and users were testing it live and fully functional. Seeing if they could navigate their way around, just down to the nitty gritty of how do you, in that comparison table, which is a massive table if you have a lot of services selected, how do people find their way left and right and up and down? Where do we have arrows? Where do we have prompts? How do we get people back up to select something different? Those kind of things were at the very end. So we went live with it in, I should have known this for this talk. I want to say February of 18. So the usability testing ended in the end of October. The university instituted meeting accessibility, the WC3 accessibility standards right about at the same time. So right as we thought the site was ready to go, it took a couple more weeks to actually end up meeting those accessibility standards. So a little bit of time was tacked on in there. And as far as cost, there was a question in there about how much it actually cost in the end. The original budget was $10,000, and we did go a little bit over that. Dave gave us the extra money. Thank you very much. So it came in at just over $12,000 to do all of the development work, not counting my own time. So that does include a project manager from the custom development group, and I think 2 developers, and there was 1 person from the usability office that had formal time charged to the project, but none of my time was accounted for financially.
What about in the sense of like the feedback loop from the users of it, both in the sense of did the solutions that the site guided them to, this kind of relates back to success, did it guide them to the right solution? Did that solution deliver on what it claimed? Or maybe did they find out later there should have been some other questions in the interview process that would have helped them more?
That's a good question. So, I mean, the only way I can really measure that is in people who do end up coming and asking for more information from us. So when people come to the Research Data Management Service Group, whether it's to me personally or if they come to us via the website and they send us an email or are referred to us from somewhere else, if it is a data storage question, we do tend to ask whether they started by using the data storage finder. I guess I don't have any numbers for this. If I could look back through my tickets, I actually should do this. This would be a great idea. I will look back through the tickets and see how many data storage questions we had before this was launched versus after it was launched. It has not dropped to 0, but most of the questions that we have gotten in the last 2 years have been very specific about either sharing of very large data or looking for free solutions or cost-free solutions for kind of special needs. So whether it's analytics that they have to do or like working on a different operating system. So we don't have a lot of Linux users, but we do have some. So they really want a web-based solution, or they want to be able to interact with something like Box using an API. Or other tools that assist them in automating things. So those kind of issues are not addressed in the data storage finder. We have gotten a few of those.
There's also a question about your slides, whether we could have a copy or a link to a copy.
Sure, I would be, what's the best way for me to do that? To share it back with you? Or there's a version of these slides on the Open Science Framework because I gave this talk to at a library conference. I can share that. They were changed very slightly for you guys.
Either way, because we can, if it's just a link to something that already exists, we can put it right into this document. If it's a copy of the slides, we'll put it in the Google folder where this document that we're using is. Either way works.
All right, I'll send you a copy of the slides that I actually used today. Or I'll put it, I'm copying the Google Drive right now, so I'll put it in there for you. There's a question I see now, how long to set up or gather the resource information and input it into Drupal? So gathering the information, so it was all kind of simultaneous. So once we, once we had kind of the general idea down after the first round of usability testing that we confirmed we wanted to move forward with that kind of format that Weill Cornell had used with the faceting and the card kind of things. We called them cards on the right-hand side. I did start gathering information at that point. So that was kind of simultaneously happening, obviously kind of intermittently. I would send out a batch of emails to people and put a deadline on it, and we would get half of them back for deadline, and that's people, and I'd meet people and we would get that information filled out. So that was really happening along that same time frame, probably really starting in earnest in October and November. And most of that the initial information was fed in by the developers for me. I only had to make changes after the point at which they said, you know, this thing works and it's functional. Anything else that you want to add after that, you're going to do yourself. So I probably only added half a dozen services myself after that. And they're pretty easy. They're very easy to add new services and information as long as you have it. Some back and forth with the service providers to get it. Have we used this project to help rationalize or consolidate storage solutions on campus? That's a great question. Not that I know of. It is there, the RDMSG as a group, so not the service providers, have tried to take a look at where there are redundancies to some extent, mostly so that we can know that what people have, what we can say is available to people within a certain kind of set of parameters that they're looking for storage at. But more importantly, this idea of gaps. I think one of the other things that the RDMSG does a really good job of at Cornell is finding out where things are missing. And although the group itself doesn't have the ability, because we don't have a budget in and of itself, the group doesn't, but we can take up administratively through the institution saying, hey, there's a need. The same way this actually came into fruition, like what kind of services are people clamoring for that we don't have at this institution? And we're, like I said, I mentioned the kind of two things that people are asking about is storage. As far as getting rid of any or consolidating, that one is pretty tough. There's, as I'm sure you all are familiar with, that people get set in their ways with what they like to use. So people will swear by Google or they'll swear by Dropbox and they won't touch Box, or the other way around. And so it's been pretty hard to say, the one is better than the other. I think the two that we have on this campus that are the most similar are, our options that are available with G Suite and the Box services that we have. But other than that, there's not a lot of redundancies. If you go in there and you say, I have to store secure data, there's not a lot of options on campus for that. So I don't feel that there's been a tremendous amount of redundancy on this campus, and whether or not we have all the gaps filled is a different question. Whether individual service providers have used it that way to get rid of things, I don't know. And I don't know that we've gotten, things have transitioned. You know, when we started this tool, it was only easy backup, and our university is switching over to code 42. The moment both are still on that. So I think they're in the process of doing some transitioning on some tools, but none have really been eliminated that people have told me about till this next round, till February of next year, when I go around and ask everyone again. Do we have ownership statements? For example, retiring faculty, what happens to their data? So no. The short answer is no. We have had faculty come to the RDMSG and or the library with an interest in archiving their collections at retirement. And it really is made on a case-by-case decision based on the value of that content and the condition that it's in. So the archives really make those calls for the physical materials. We do have obviously an institutional repository where we can put other content, but it really depends on how. We don't have a service that prepares or digitizes content at the point of retirement for people, so they have to kind of be willing to do that themselves for the most part, at least as of right now. Did I miss people's questions?
I've got one that I was about to type in, but I'll just do it here and then I'll type it in. In your experience, are your users more, are they more likely to use this to start a conversation with you about which services to use? Because it seems like a lot of these services have a lot of complexities once you're getting into them. Or are they more commonly using this and then just going off on their own and rocking and rolling?
It is really, obviously it's really hard to tell because you don't know what you don't know, right? But we are definitely still getting inquiries. I don't have hard numbers for you, but my sense, given that I do see all the consultation requests that come in, is that what the Research Data Management Service Group is getting right now is kind of more on the side of, I am already using Box and I want to be able to do this. Can it do it? I'm already, or I already have started using AWS and now I want to use Globus. Is there a way that I can get support for this? So not as many, it doesn't seem, questions about what to use as how to use it. So wanting more information on the capabilities of the individual storage options. That is an informal, not informal isn't the right word, a qualitative answer, not a quantitative answer.
Do you see your target audience here as more primary investigators and researchers, or lab managers, or actual researchers, grad students, postdocs, or all of the above? I think it's more the question is, where's your focus? I mean, obviously everyone can use it.
So the focus, so one of the other things we talked about a lot at the beginning of this project was scope, both on who this tool was supposed to serve, as well as what services were going to be included in it. So as far as that first part, which is your question, I would say all of the above. This is really meant, while some of the storage options that we have at Cornell are not available to students, many of these are. The people that we tend to get asking us questions, or were asking us questions before this tool went live for them to do the self-service finding, were researchers, but certainly also from the administrative side. So, the record management people, like what is the best place for them to store their content? And even so, Cornell is a part land grant institution. So we have a large, for example, cooperative extension presence, and they do a lot of data management for the state and where they put that content. So that is Those are staff members at our institution that need data storage options, and this is really built to help them as well. That's just one example of many staff who use it. So all of the above. And then as far as scoping what is actually included in the tool, there are other storage options people use on this campus, but we specifically put in this tool only those that were available to everyone on campus, and that we had an enterprise license to. So there are people who use a private instance of Dropbox, for example, but Cornell does not license Dropbox as an institution, so that was not included on it. Another example is that we know that several departments offer other storage options through just their department themselves. So they stand up their own independent servers, independent of central IT, and people in that department can use those, but those were not included very consciously on this table so that people didn't have to select anything other than Cornell or non-Cornell as far as who was going to use it.
Thanks. I mean, I love this tool, and I really want to deploy it in my environment. We're closer to departmental IT, so that's we have to make some different choices. But I also see the real value as, you know, enterprise wide. So there's definitely some trade-offs. But the tool itself is great and very beautiful. And although it certainly sounds expensive, you did get your money's worth.
I think so, and I hope it would cost you a lot less to do at this point. So like I said, if you want to take a look, if you just look, I know Colgate's tool is public. I know that UCSD's tool is public, and I know that Minnesota has stood it up. I'm not sure whether their tool is public yet. We had probably, after I gave that first talk at that library conference in early 2018, shortly after we had gone live with the tool, I probably had, I'm trying to remember, I think I had 17 different institutions write to me asking for the code for it. So once it went live, I kind of wrote this big blanket email to all those people saying, hey, you were interested in this and we finally have it ready and we're willing to share it.
Yeah, and the GitHub is great. So thank you for making it open source and public, because it's just really great.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And like I said before, if you guys have, or if you all have technical side questions, I'd be happy to forward it on to the developers. I did warn them that I was giving this talk and that I was probably ill prepared to answer some of the questions that you have. So I'm happy to do that. They they do charge me for their time, no. But they generally are willing to answer questions. They're like it said on the license for the reuse. We don't really offer support or guarantee that the code's going to work beyond what we had here, but you all can figure that out, I'm sure.
So we're wondering where will the Excel spread worksheet be posted?
So I see that you shared the link to the notes in Drive. If you share the folder above that with me, I could dump them there, or I could email them to you if you would like, and then have you post them there. I could put the slides and the spreadsheet.
Yeah, I'll quickly put the folder that everything is in so that we have that to work with.
Okay. The Excel sheet is not pretty, just to warn you. But it was just a proof of concept.
Do we miss any questions, anyone out there? Or if anyone has additional questions, feel free to open your mic. Okay. Anything else? Anyone have any last questions here? We're getting close to the top of the hour.
So I just put the link in the chat for the folder that for this call.
Got it.
There we go.
All right, I will put a copy of the presentation there, and I'll put a copy of that original pivot table sheet in there.
Excellent.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for all this. This is just wonderful.
Yep, we really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for attending, and if there's any other questions, we can answer them, but if not, we'll call it a
See you
day.
in January. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.